Hi, today we're going to look at naming geometric figures. It's important in geometry that we're all using the same notation so that we can all be talking to each other about what figures look like, especially when we can't do it face to face. Notation is going to become very important. When you're reading directions for a problem, you need to know, are they talking about lines, rays, segments, and the notation is what tells you what the figure looks like. So let's look at some typical things we're going to see. The first one is point. A point we've used in algebra when we've graphed coordinates. A point is a location. It has no size. So for example, if we wanted to draw a point, we normally just draw a dot, and sometimes you'll see other shapes because again, it has no size. It's just telling us where location is. Think about when you've seen a map of Texas and all the cities have little dots on them showing you where they are. But sometimes you'll look at a map and you'll see Austin doesn't have a little dot. Sometimes it has a star to indicate that it's the capital. That is still a point on the map. It just happens to be shaped differently than a dot. In geometry, our points will always be written as a dot. To label a point, we always use a capital letter. So this letter's label might be a capital A. It cannot be a lowercase a. If I needed to use this as an answer to a problem, for example, what is pictured in the first box on the right, my answer would be example. It would be the word point followed by a capital A. We cannot use lowercase. The next thing we're going to see a lot in geometry is a line. And a line is a set of points that extends forever in two directions. A set of points that extends forever in two directions. So if I was going to draw a line, to show that it extends forever in two directions, I need to make sure that on both ends I add arrows. To name our line, it will always have a lowercase letter. So next to one of the arrows, either the one on the left or the one on the right, it can be in either end, you'll see a little lowercase letter. In this case, I'm going to call this line B. So my example is, I could call this line B. Notice I wrote the word first, line B. Sometimes our lines don't have a label on them, but they have points that are labeled on the line. So for example, I might have point C, point D, and point E labeled on this line. If I don't have a lowercase letter and I need to label the line, I could use 2 points from the line. Any 2 points I want. It doesn't matter which two, and it doesn't even have to be in any particular order as far as alphabet goes. So I could call this line B, or I could pick any 2 points. I could pick D and E, and I could call this line D, E. Notice I put a little segment, I drew a little line above it with arrows on both ends. That's what tells me that it is a line that goes through points D and E. There's only one line that will connect through points D and E. Okay? Or I could say maybe point or line E, C. And again, to show that it's a line, I'm going to draw a little line with 2 arrows right above it. So it's the line that goes through point E and point C. There's only one line that will connect them. I could have also said DC or line CD or CE. Any 2 points on this line I could pick. I cannot say line CB because B is the name of the line. It's not a point on the line. Okay, B is a whole separate thing that you just need just that one lowercase letter to name that line. Okay, let's look at a line segment. A line segment is part of a line and it has 2 endpoints. So it's part of that whole line that I had there, but it has 2, instead of going in 2 directions, it has 2 endpoints. So if I were going to draw a segment, I have to make sure that it has points on each end, not arrows on each end. To name our segment, we have to use both endpoints. And notice they're called end points, which means they have to be capital letters, because always we do our points in capital letters. Okay, so for example, if I wanted to name this one, first I need to label it. Let's say I have an F. Let's say there's a G somewhere on here, and then maybe an H over here. To name this one, I have to name it with the end points. So it has to be the points that are on the end. So in this case, I can't use point G. I have to use the 2 points that are on either end. So I can call this segment FH, or I could call this segment HF. Now, important, just like I said this was line DE, and the line that goes through E and C, I have to show that this is a segment. I don't have to put little dots on the end. I can, it's not wrong, but remember, since points have no size, I don't have to physically see them on the end to know that they're there, like I do with an arrow for a line. Okay, so again, this one can be named segment FH or segment HF. So you always, when you're reading it out loud, you say what's on top first and then the 2. So segment FH, segment HF. And I know that those are the endpoints. Okay? Let's do one more for this video, and then we'll save the last 2 for the second video for today's notes. Okay? The next one we're going to look at is array. And as an array is also part of a line, with only one endpoint. And extends forever in one direction. So remember, my line goes forever in 2 directions. Array goes forever in just one direction because it has an endpoint on one end. So what it looks like is I would have an endpoint, and then it goes off in some direction. And it could go any direction. I could draw it looking like this. Okay? The way we name them is we use the endpoint, then what we call a direction point. So we have to know that endpoint. Let's say it's point I. And then we have to have another point somewhere on here. There could be like 3 points here. I just have to pick one. Let's say there's J. So then, for example, I could name this Ray I J. You always have to start with the endpoint. So since this starts at I and goes towards J and then through it, I always have to start with I and then go to J, and then above it, just like with my line and my ray, or my line and my segment, I have to draw what looks like a segment, and then I have to draw an arrow on the right-hand side, always on the right, because it's going to be above the letter that it goes towards. Okay, if I look at this second one, let's say that this has a K for this point, and then we'll need to pick another point somewhere on here. Let's say that's point L. So then to name this one, I have to start with the K because that's the end point. That's where this ray starts at. And then it goes off in the direction of L. So that's the second letter, is the direction it goes off in. Above it, even though this ray is pointing to the left, above it, my little arrow is still going to point to the right because the arrow needs to be over the L that shows me the direction that this ray goes in. Okay, so there is information about naming points, lines, segments, and rays. And in our next video, we're going to look at planes and angles. Thank you.